I'm speaking about balance today because it just was the equinox, when the light and the dark are in balance in a great ebb and flow of light and dark, back and forth throughout the years, throughout the millennia, throughout the ages. It's a still point, the equinox, in this ebb and flow. The light and the dark are two elements in our experience, and in the Hebrew scriptures, they're both called good. Light is good, darkness is good. They ebb and they flow into each other. So, the ancient people noticed 4 holidays that had to do with the sun, and they were celebrated. So, one is the winter solstice, when the nights are longest. One is the summer solstice, when the days are longest. And 2 are the winter and the fall and spring equinox, when days and nights are equal. And the symbol of this religion you can often find, it's circle that's divided into quarters. So you have these 4 quarter holidays or sun celebrations, and it looks like a wheel. And the ancients would talk about the wheel of the year and the wheel turning, and the first turn of the wheel was the beginning of time, and the wheel continues to turn. So, when we're at an equinox, we see a balance of light and dark. And I think about balance in my life. And when I first started to think about balance in my life, I was not a big fan. I liked the roller coasters. I liked extremes. I just enjoyed all the dynamic changes. And I thought, really, balance is so temporary that you might as well enjoy being out of balance, because that happens more than being in balance. And it was my policy at the time just to enjoy what was ever, wherever I was. That way you get to enjoy more of your life. But then I started taking karate. And for 5 years, I had to learn to balance, because what I realized was that living things only can balance in a dynamic equilibrium. When things are not alive, or when they're alive like rocks in a kind of a very slow way, they can balance and keep that balance a long time. I have a photograph of balanced rocks on the front of your bulletin, because those rocks are alive very slowly and they can balance for a long time. But a living balance demands a lot of attention. And so I wanted to talk to you about a balance that has nothing to do with being still for a long period of time or being steady for a long period of time, but a balance from which you can spring into action, or from which you can accept an attack and be harder to knock over. And I've realized throughout the years, working as a therapist with a black belt, that emotional balance and physical balance are related, I think. So, we all know that balance is temporary, and that a lot of things can take our balance away. Now, this is a preacher secret, that whenever you promise that you're going to preach about a certain thing, the week before you preach about that thing, you have an experience of that thing. It's not always fun. For example, last Sunday I got sick. And I hate being sick. It throws me off balance. And it's embarrassing to be sick in front of people. And did I say it makes me mad? Yeah, I'm not a very good sick person. So getting sick can throw your balance off. Having an unexpectedly low bank account, when you check your balance and you go, what? I see some of you have had that experience. There are aliens siphoning off my money. There are many very, very serious things that human beings deal with. Being harmed, losing someone close to you, having a terrible diagnosis. All of these things just rob us of our balance, and it takes a while to get our balance back. And one would hope that working on being emotionally stable and balanced would help us deal with these things a little bit better. I mean, nothing is going to help you sail through a difficult divorce with a smile on your face and a song on your lips. That would be, I don't know, nuts. And it's really appropriate to be in agony sometimes. But emotional stability can help us with the other little slings, arrows, and dings that happen. Did Shakespeare say dings? I don't think so. But anyway, that happen during a life. And having a moving balance, practicing that helps physically and emotionally. Okay, so one of the first things that we learned over and over again, and in karate class, in any kind of class, music, dance, art, you're always going back to the basics. And one of the basics is your stance. And you have to figure out how to have a wide enough stance and a narrow enough stance, just right, so that you're hard to knock over. That's one of the elements. And I think the emotional parallel of having maybe a too wide stance, you stand too wide and you're easy to knock over. I think sometimes we have a too wide stance by trying to be everything to everybody. We think, oh, you want me to be this kind of person? Okay, I can do that. You want me to be available for this? Okay, I can do that. You want me to tolerate that? Oh, okay, I can do that. I can be nice. I can never say no. I can always make you feel fabulous. I can put myself second all the time. And that is too wide a stance. Hear me? Okay. So, trying to cover too much ground, trying to do too much, trying to be too much, all of that makes you easy to knock over. And the way to narrow that down is to be able to say, this I can do and that I cannot do. I can go this far, but I cannot go that far. I can say yes to this, but I'm going to have to say no to that. I can tolerate this, but I'm not living with that. That is a way to narrow your stance. Now, you don't want too narrow a stance either, because everybody knows when you've tried to stand with both of your feet touching each other and your knees squished together, you get a little tippy that way too. So what emotionally might be too narrow a stance? Well, I think you get too narrow a stance when you have too limited a view of who you are. You think, oh, I could never do that. I'm just not the kind of person who takes long trips. I'm not the kind of person that could just jump in the car and go. I'm just not. Oh no, I never could speak to a group like that. I never could tell that story. I never could go to Antarctica. I never. So you have to think in your self-definition, your self-differentiation. Am I giving myself enough room? Am I limiting myself too much? Some people take too narrow a stance by having a picture of how things should be, having a way things should be done. And a lot of families have this. This is the way this is done. Boom. And it's registered with the International Bureau of Standards. And anybody who does it differently is stupid. There may be more than one way to God. There may be more than one way to change oil. There may be more than one way to build a doghouse. There may be more than one way to cook a meatloaf. You know what I'm saying? So if you're a person who has only one way of doing things, your stance is too narrow. If you're a person who gets an idea of how something should be, this is related but different. Say you're going on a trip to the beach, okay? you have your picture of how it should go. And if it doesn't go that way, you might say something to your companions like, "Oh, well, fine, this vacation's ruined." Because it didn't go the way you had a picture of going, and by the way, you never told anybody what your picture was. You know how the 12-step people say that expectations are premeditated resentments? That is one way of having too narrow a stance. Now, you can have a perfect stance, but if you don't have any bounce in your knees, if you don't have any softness, flexibility, you're going to still be too easy to knock over. Now, back when my knees could do it, I had a softness in my knees because that helps you be able to spring into action in a number of different directions. And I see that as being, as having some kind of flexibility in your thinking. Again, it's a way to lower your center of gravity. Now, the closer you are to the ground, or that's not really true, but if you find the right degree of closeness to the ground, if you lower your center of gravity just right, then you're very, very hard to knock over. Have y'all had that experience? If you stand with your knees stiff, you're going to be easier to knock over, but if you can really get down there, then you can move a number of different ways and someone can push on you. This is a martial arts game that a lot of people play. You know, you take a stance and then you try to push each other, make each other step back. And the first person who steps back loses a point and then you start over again. But you are able to yield the space and twist and bend and yet stay balanced. Now, what would it mean to be close to the ground? What would it mean to have a low center of gravity? I think it means being willing to make a mistake. Because if you have to be perfect all the time, if you feel like a mistake equals death, which many of us do, then you're going to be knocked over a lot. You're going to spend a lot of time looking up at the sky going, what happened? If you're willing to make mistakes in the part of your life, now I know if you're a nurse, you cannot make mistakes during your workday because people die. So I give an exemption to everyone in the medical profession, okay. But everybody else, and the medical people when they're at home, there is room for us to make mistakes. Usually nobody dies. Engineers too. No mistakes when you're making the bridge. Okay. Now I'm going to be not listening to what I'm saying. I'm going to be thinking about all the people that can't make mistakes. But in most people's lives, in most of the time in your life, you can make room for mistakes and nobody dies. So the other thing that I look at, and this is what I wrote a piece a long time ago called Meg's Bible Control Bill. And I proposed that we have that we borrow from our gun control legislation and ask people to have a 3-day waiting period before they can purchase a Bible. Because you have to sign a paper that says you're relatively sane or on your medications. You should sign a paper that says you're not someone who hits children while reciting Bible verses. And you have to have started at least 3 sentences in the past year with the words, I could be wrong. So I think being willing to lower your center of gravity is being willing to start a good number of sentences, either silently or out loud, with, I could be wrong. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think, but I could be wrong. And being actually willing to actually entertain that. Another way of lowering your center of gravity is to let other people have their say before you have yours. Another way of lowering your center of gravity is really craving to understand what the other people are saying before you crave to have yourself understood. These are all ways of lowering your center of gravity. In the Eastern religions, they would call it being like water. In the Western religions, they would call it humility. Lowering your center of gravity so that you're harder to knock over. Makes you stronger, not weaker. I remember working as a therapist, and people would say, I worked 15 years as a therapist, people would say, oh, Meg, we've tried every other therapist in town, and we just can't get any help, and you're our last hope. And when I was a young woman, that would really hook me, and I would be like, I can help you. And as I grew old and far gone in sin, as my Uncle William would say, I would say, you guys, or y'all, if 6 therapists haven't been able to do anything for you, I probably can't either. And I can give it a shot, but I wouldn't really count on much. And then they would go, okay. And I would think, oh, all right. So I'll do my best. We'll see what happens. And I didn't feel the world was on my shoulders. That's a way of getting your center of gravity lower. So we all only balance momentarily. We don't achieve it and then go on to think about other things. It's a constant dynamic. One of my favorite therapist writers calls it playing ball on running water. The terrain is always shifting and changing. That child who was once so delightful has turned into a hooligan. You have to put your mom in a home. Your sister's dating somebody completely wrong for her. Your children want to put you in a home. I keep records of how forgetful I am now, so they won't think it's senility later on. I'll be like, oh no, I forgot where that thing was when I was in my mid-40s. One image of balance that I love the best, I used to think about it when I was doing karate all the time, is that, you know, when you take pottery class and you have this lump of clay and you have a wheel that's spinning and you take the lump of clay and you go wham on the middle of the wheel and you try to get it what they call centered because it's, you know, like in the middle. And then when it's perfectly centered, the wheel can start spinning and you put pressure on that thing and it makes something beautiful. And if you don't get it centered, the wheel starts to spin and the thing starts going roop, 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 roop. And you know the difference in those feelings in your life. And so I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to be centered, I'm going to be balanced, I'm going to find that place. And then when my life starts to spin and the pressure is on, something beautiful can be made instead of a mess. And every now and then it works.